Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PolicyBytes podcast, where we're going to explore the future of platform engineering, cloud-native technologies, AI, and of course, the fast-growing world of policy as code. I'm Courtney Nickerson, head of community at Nirmata, the creators of the Kyverno project, and one of the hosts for this brand new series. And I'm joined today by my co-host, Jim Bourgeoisia. Jim, welcome to PolicyBytes. We're finally getting it off the ground.
Yes, thank you, Courtney, and thanks, everyone. I'm Jim Badwadia, co-founder, CEO at Nirmata, and also one of the maintainers of Kyverno.
And very excited for this podcast because we've been talking about it for quite some time. So we're really excited to be here with everyone today. PolicyBytes is going to be your place where you're going to hear real stories, practical insights, and emerging trends from engineers, architects, leaders who are shaping the modern Kubernetes platform engineering space, as well as leveraging policy as code, AI, and loads of other tools and technologies that are super interesting to help people build, secure, scale, and create reliable systems in the real world. So this podcast is brought to you by Nirmata. They're the creators of the Kyverno project and the primary maintainers of that project, which is a Kubernetes native policy engine. Jim, you want to tell us a little bit about Kyverno and Nirmata?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Nirmata, started actually, in the early days of Kubernetes, and one of the things we started seeing is, of course, the power of Kubernetes comes in its extensibility, right? So it has something for everybody, and Kubernetes, of course, has several different roles. You have developers, you have operators, you have security teams, all interacting in many cases on the same shared set of YAMLs. So the challenge we started seeing is how do you kind of keep things in order? How do you do things like making sure that developers are able to get self-service and configure things that they need to, but they're not either like setting some insecure configurations, or maybe like just because of all of the other options or the detailed options you can do, like with pod security contexts, or even at different workload levels, forgetting to set something which establishes security. So we wanted to automate as much of those security configs as possible. And that was some of the early thinking behind Kyverno. So interestingly, it started more for automation versus security, but security tends to be one of the main leading use cases. And then, putting that together as engineers, of course, our thought process was, why not just automate everything we can in terms of making that configuration easy? So that's how Kyverno, kind of came about, and initially got started and formulated as, of course, uh, features at that time in Kubernetes, like this was in the 1.14, 1.15 releases, which was quite a while ago now. The features like webhook, dynamic webhook controllers, as well as CRDs matured. We adopted, of course, a lot of those and made Kyverno very native to Kubernetes, which is where it still, I think, resonates quite a bit with the community.
Absolutely. And for anyone who's looking to follow along the Kyverno or Nirmata journeys, you can follow us always on LinkedIn, YouTube, GitHub, or you can subscribe to PolicyBytes, which is going to be available to you on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, or anywhere else that you get your favorite podcasts. So today we are kicking off this very first PolicyBytes episode with a very special guest, Marie Padberg. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me to your first episode today.
Yes, you are our very first guest. Our very first recording. We did a pilot, but our first official season 1 guest. It's such a lovely honor to have you here. You're a DevOps engineer and a consultant. You have loads of platform teams adopt cloud native tooling. You also give talks about Kyverno and a lot of other things surrounding policy as code and other technologies in the space. because I discovered you through our friend Timo Durstepen, who is the CTO of Giant Swarm, who attended one of your recent talks. And he was like, if you're launching a podcast, you have to ask Marie. And I couldn't agree more. So thank you so much for joining us today. It would be great if you started us off telling us a little bit about yourself and your own journey into the cloud native space.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to tell about me. I work at Infologistics. It's a company specializing on data engineering. And over 5 years ago, we implemented our first cloud native project and have since steadily expanded our technology expertise by building a highly motivated and skilled team of developers. And recently we launched KubeSpectra, a brand which is focused on open source technologies, and our core work involves designing, building, and operating Kubernetes-based container platforms. And from our project experience, we recognized the complexity of cloud-native environments and developed the modular cloud stack. And the modular cloud stack follows a sovereign cloud stack approach, applying cloud-native and platform engineering principles to create scalable, resilient, and maintainable systems. And my first contact with the cloud-native ecosystem was when I joined Infologistics, because everybody who joins Infologistics will solve an internal certification path where every technology we use in client project is introduced. And like many others, I have, of course, problems with understanding Kubernetes and get all the topics and so on, because it's a broad range in topics you can learn on Kubernetes. But by reading and trying out a lot of things, I started to like it and learn more and more. And now in my project, I support customers in exactly these topics and also provide trainings to become more familiar with these cloud-native technologies. And one of my favorite technologies is, of course, policy as code with Kyverno, which is the reason I gave some talks about it.
Yeah, we really appreciate you giving talks to the community about Kyverno. So how did you actually discover Kyverno in the first place?
In the first place, I discovered it because some colleague told me about it. We were in a new project, which was about building a new container platform based on Kubernetes from scratch. And of course, none of the development teams had experience with Kubernetes, but nevertheless, it had to be ensured, for example, that an application does not run as a root user or that resource specifications are defined. So we needed some policies that enforce these rules. And then I started to read something about Kyverno, but while I was Googling something about policies, I also found that SUSE Neuvektor has admission controls. I found a lot of it and then had to compare it and found out that the widest range of what we need could be solved by Kyverno in combination with maybe the pod security admission controller and SUSE Neuvektor. That was my first approach with Kyverno.
Yeah, what surprised you most when you first started working with Kyverno?
I like most how easy it is to start with it. I started reading the documentation. Of course, not everything. I just copied one easy to understand policy and implemented it on my local K3S cluster and deployed also some resources and saw some were blocked, some were not blocked, read some policy reports and had the first understanding of it. So that was definitely a nice start to test some things by Kyverno and how it works, to have an idea if it's that what we're looking for. And of course, then I read a bit more in the documentation to improve some policies I found and implemented on my local K3S cluster.
So you mentioned some of your early use cases were to help developers. Do you remember any examples, or like what were the first few policies that you started with?
The first few policies was about the resource requests every deployment should contain. And I think the second one was that images have to be from our own image registry. So we don't want to have any images from Docker Hub on the internal cluster.
Makes sense. So no public images, and you mentioned resource requests. So you were requiring like CPU memory had to be specified. Was it requests only or requests and limits? Or
correctly, I think it was requests only.
Okay.
And we want to enforce that if someone uses the storage for MTD, that there's a size limit. That's the third one of the resource requests we demand.
Very cool. On the resources, was that for cost savings or just to make sure that things got scheduled correctly, or was there any specific problem you were trying to solve?
We are using Rancher as a SUSE Rancher for managing our clusters. And SUSE Rancher provides so-called projects. And in the projects, you can give resources that are only for this requests, only for these projects. And if you want to deploy within this project something, you have to give these requests so that Rancher knows how much of the project is used or is not used.
Nice.
And also there's a framework in Germany which has requirements that say that you always have to give these requests with it. It's called, in German it's IT Grundschutz, I think it's in English, IT-based protection that has those requirements.
Okay.
I didn't know that. I had no idea that there's an actual requirement for this. That's great.
I think something of this framework is great. Not everything, but yeah, it also has a requirement that the images have to be from a secure registry or that you have to implement health checks. And to fulfill this framework, it's pretty cool to use the policies with Kyverno because you can document what you have and you can show it in code that all these baseline protections are fulfilled, which is important, for example, in regulated industries.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very, very cool. You learn something new every day. I had no idea that they had this like stipulated in Germany. I have to look and see if there are other places with this. Did you know about this, Jim?
I did not. No, that's very interesting. So, but how did you, like in terms of regulatory compliance, you mentioned you could show the policy, but did you also use then reports from Kyverno or what now is open reports?
You mean if we use the policy reports that were generated after? Yes, we're using them, but only internal for the development teams to see if they pass every policies, because in the non-production environment, usually our validations are in audit mode, and in the production environment, they change to the enforce mode. And of course, the policies are the same in every environment. So in the non-prod, they can play around, test the things, implement, develop, and see if they pass all the validations, and then they can change to the production environment where every validations are in the enforce mode. So in that case, there are not that many policy reports left because everything is in the enforce mode.
Cool. So your production environments were clean, everything was enforced, but then in non-prod, you kind of run everything in audit. That makes sense. Okay. But going back on the compliance side, like what else did you need to do? Like what evidence did you, like was there anything else that you had to show, like for regulatory compliance that Kyverno might have helped with?
The pod should not be run in the as a root user, of course, so we have to implement a security context. And I think there are two ways to implement it. The first is to use the Kubernetes built-in pod security admission controller, which you can enable by activating a label on the namespace, or you can implement all these validations by Kyverno. And our solution was to implement a mutating policy, which puts a label on every new created namespace. So we are using that case both and had to implement only one policy that implements the label. And of course, a validation that validates that nobody changed the pod security standards, which are privileged, not privileged, the other one, restricted in our clusters.
So let's change gears a little bit, because you do spend a lot of time working with real world platform teams, and this seems to be, a space that's growing exponentially. Because you work so closely with DevOps and platform teams, your understanding of how policy as code works in real environments is super valuable to people who are listening in. So what do you see are the most common or impactful Kyverno use cases out there with the teams that you consult? And specifically, where are they getting their biggest operational or business value when they're using them?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think we have to distinguish in the teams I work with. I'm working in the platform team, but we are working for development teams that are our customers. That means the platform team implements all the policies, and the development teams don't implement these policies. They only get the restrictions by the validations, or the workloads will be somehow mutated, or what else we've implemented with Kyverno. And I think most valuable is that many developers are new on Kubernetes and they're not sure if it's allowed to do this or is it wrong? How is my deployment safe? And we have these policies that check every configuration. And if your pod is allowed to join the cluster, you can be sure that your configuration is correct, because otherwise the policies would block it. Or if it's just boilerplate code like injecting some labels, we can do it with the mutation. So the developers can really develop their stuff and don't have to think of everything. I think it makes some workflows a bit easier. Even if there are some blocking messages, I think sometimes they're frustrating if the teams don't understand why is my deployment blocked now, even if they're helpful messages. But then there are the possibilities to ask the platform team, and normally we can help them to pass all the validations. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it answered it really, really thoroughly, actually. It did not sound like it was a hard question for you. You prefaced it, it's a hard question, but then it did not sound like it was a hard one. I'm sure you see a lot of different types of teams out there as well. What are the biggest differences between teams that are just starting with policies and then the much more mature teams? Do you see a lot of difference in how they're functioning? Do you see maturity in how they're using policy as code excel quickly, or is this a slow process? What do you usually see happen?
I think policies are not the most favorite topic of every team I met yet. So especially the development teams like it to call it the cluster police, and they need in the beginning often support to understand why is it necessary to have this validation, where do I have to change anything in my deployments. But over time, the mouse can work with it pretty good, I think. Some weeks ago, I had contact with a more experienced team, and they were wondering why there's no validation about the size limit in empty dir storage, because every resource should be restricted. And then we could explain there's a mutating policy which just inserted if it's not inserted before. So many teams see the validating policies because the feedback is immediately if it's blocked, but the mutating policies are more in the background. They just change things. And if you don't take a look actively into your manifest, you won't see it. So it's important to communicate that there are some mutations after deploying.
Any questions you want to add there, Jim?
No, yeah, I was just thinking about the last thing you said right there. So in terms of communicating that mutation, like one of the things that Kyverno does is, of course, we produce events. There are reports on this too, but is there anything else you think that Kyverno could do or that would otherwise be helpful to users?
I think the most helpful to users is to have every validation in the enforce mode, because events are ignored, reports are ignored. If it's not painful enough, some people won't learn it, I think. Some month ago, I explored the policy, what's the name? Policy Reporter.
Okay, yeah.
That's a nice tool to make the policy reports visible, to have some diagrams, some graphs, because it's messy to read every policy report and every namespace. I think to get a fast overview for this, I like it pretty much.
Yeah, it's a great tool. It was created by one of our Kyverno maintainers, Frank. Like at that time, he was an end user. So one interesting thing, a lot of our maintainers, like Frank joined Nirmata a few years ago. He also started as a Kyverno user and then started contributing, and he created Policy Reporter at a prior job just for that need, because they wanted his developers to have that visibility. It's good to hear that was useful.
I think that's pretty useful to have this visibility, because otherwise to search for events, it might be messy and sometimes uncomfortable. That was the reason why we have a build action in Git to deploy on the cluster, and after deployment, the Git action shows the event with policy failures.
Okay.
If there are policies in the out mode.
Okay. So those are actions you run in your CI pipeline with the Kyverno CLI?
In that case, actually not, because it's a build action for the development teams. They build their applications, push it to Git, and then they can run it. They can run this build action, which deploys everything to the cluster. And then they get feedback if it was successful or not. The GitHub action for Kyverno we're using in the platform team for testing our policies because we're implementing everything with GitOps.
Got
And
it.
that's, I think, a nice approach for it.
Okay. Do you also use Chainsaw to test policies today, or any other operators?
No, I have read about it, but we haven't used it because the platform team has its own test cluster. So we have our test deployments running, and if there's a new policy, we immediately have our feedback. And if it's good, it can go to the non-production environment for the development teams, and then to the production, of course.
Makes sense.
Very cool. So let's jump in a little bit to all of your community movement, because you do contribute a lot to community, Marie. You give loads of talks contributing information and insight and knowledge to the community. And a lot of them really help bridge the gap for newcomers and practitioners who are trying to adopt policy as code. I saw your latest one, a Kyverno 101 talk. What inspired you to get on stage and start speaking publicly about Kyverno, and how do you see audiences respond to most of your talks?
I think that question ties with the question from the beginning with my first steps, how I explored Kyverno, because there were multiple options, I think, for defining policies in Kubernetes. And I explored some options and was wondering what their unique features are and where these tools maybe overlap. And this kind of exploration led to my first presentation on Kyverno, in which I compared different tools and demonstrated how they might work together. And from the feedback on this presentation and what I've heard in other talks, it seemed that many people have a basic understanding of Kyverno, but aren't really sure how to work with it effectively. And that was exactly the gap I wanted to address with my presentations this year, because my talk focused on how to write a slightly more complex policy, then test it both manually and automatically, and finally monitor it. I think that was the motivation behind my talks I gave about Kyverno. And in the feedback, I often got the question how to start best, what's the easiest way, and how many policies do you have in your clusters, which I think is a hard question because I didn't count them, but I think about 15 to 20. But the policy contains sometimes more rules, so it's not easy to say if didn't count before.
Yep, people always ask how how many policies people have, and sometimes people are like 5, and then other times people are like 500, and it's like, whoa, the span can be
500 is a lot.
Yeah, the span that people use it's insane sometimes. The different answers that are given when people ask that question. That's good to know you get asked that question also, because I think I heard it come up often. What about you, Jim?
Yeah, no, that range about 20 to 30 is usually a good starting point because of pod security and others. But yeah, like anything at some point, I think like Marie also said, you might, if you're running policies in audit mode, you could scan clusters like through Kyverno CLI, you can run scans offline, right? So then you don't have to necessarily install all of the policies in cluster. So keeping it to that at 50 to 100 makes a lot of sense for latency and other things.
Very good. So this would not be an actual like up-to-date podcast if we didn't talk about AI. I feel like this is right. AI driven, AI, agentic AI is everywhere. So we are seeing two really big movements with the rise of AI driven tools and the maturing of policy as code. Both of them are reshaping how teams build and operate platforms. And a lot of that has to do with just the basic question of AI for policy or policy for AI, which is a whole nother debate that we can probably have for days. But how do you see AI influencing policy as code, or policy as code influencing how teams govern their AI workloads?
I think AI agents, of course, can help to write new policies, to improve existing ones, or explain specific parts. But I experienced with ChatGPT that he's not that good in writing deny rules because he is hallucinating operators that don't exist. So the policy sounds good, but is impossible to implement with this operator that doesn't exist. So I like using it for understanding sometimes the regex parts and the deny rules. But regarding AI workloads, I haven't encountered many requirements so far. We do manage Kubernetes clusters with GPU nodes, but currently there haven't been any requests for specific policies on these clusters. That might be changed in future, but actually there are no requirements.
Yes, to the first point you made on, like tools like ChatGPT or Cursor or others, you're right? Like one of the things we noticed, and one of the reasons why at Nirmata we're building also an AI agent for policy as code, is the standard tools can maybe get to maybe 40 to 60% accuracy on some of the more advanced operations, but then tend to have a lot of problems, right? So we're creating some tools. We have a CLI tool which can help also generate as well as test policies. And we're training it more and more on advanced policy types, as well as, now, of course, with the new Kyverno versions, with 1.15, 1.16, we've introduced cell-based policies. So also converting some of the older policy types to cell policies. So it can help with a lot of those type of operations. But clearly there's a lot of, anything as code seems like there could be value driven by AI from what we see.
I think I read about it. You're talking about NCTL AI, right?
That's
and
right.
I think that could be pretty helpful if there are some validating policies that block the workloads, and it can insert the missing part of it. And even if it's something wrong which was applied by it, there is still the Kyverno policy which is validating the workload, and if it's wrong, it will block it again. So you have another try to correct it then. But you don't have to start from scratch because you have the support from the AI. I think especially for teams that are pretty new to Kubernetes would like that one. I haven't tried it yet, only read about it, but I think it sounds good.
That's good to hear. Yeah, definitely. If you get to try it, would love to get feedback and thoughts on that, and anything else we can help improve or add.
Oh yeah, I will do that. I think the next days, if there's more time, I just read today about it, I'm going to try it.
Sounds good.
And then that'll be your next talk.
Yeah.
You're like, Kyverno wouldn't win.
Next year.
It's really let's get started. Very cool. So platform engineering, I think if AI wasn't all the rage and didn't exist, we'd probably be only talking about platform engineering. Marie, you're someone who's helping teams adopt and really operationalize tools like Kyverno. So you have a super unique perspective on the long-term value of our tools and of policy as code. From your point of view, where does Kyverno fit into the actual future of platform engineering?
Looking at my current projects, I can imagine that Kyverno could replace some legacy applications that, for example, use Kubernetes admission webhooks to make changes on workloads. Before that kind of policies for mutating existed, we had to do some mutations and wrote our own Java applications. So maybe they could be replaced by some new policies, which of course mean to maintain more policies, but it would eliminate the need to maintain the entire Java application. I think that's something which we will apply in the next near future in some projects.
Very cool. And do you see any trends that are starting to pop up that you think will make policy as code even more important in the coming years for people?
I think it's a growing area, because when I come to some projects and explain to people, oh, we have policies, we can implement them as code, it's completely new that it's possible to have implemented policies. So I think it's growing more to have policies. In my projects, we of course have everywhere policies, but I've heard from other people on conferences that they have clusters without policies. I don't know how they enforce rules, but they don't have it yet. So I think there is a change still ongoing that everybody needs some constraints in the clusters.
Cool. Yeah. So one of the things we're, for Kyverno that we've been working on, I mentioned briefly also earlier about Cell. So now we have introduced new policy types using Cell or Common Expressions language, right, which is also used in other places in Kubernetes, like CRD validation, and for the Kubernetes built-in policy types. Have you had a chance to try the new validating policy yet, or play around with cell expressions?
I played sometimes a bit around with cell expressions, but I'm not that good in writing a cell. I think it's quite different to the otherwise to write some policies. But I'm quite interested in to see how it works, especially with the Kubernetes admission controller, which is the built-in alternative for the webhooks. I think to have policies used with the built-in controller is not a bad alternative, and I've seen the beta features may work together, but I haven't tested it yet, and it's a question I want to dive in maybe for the next talks.
Yeah, that'll be awesome to, again, see if there's any feedback or thoughts on that. And that maybe the AI can also help with those, creating some of the earlier versions of those policies. So that's one area where we continue to expand Kyverno. And then the other trend with Kyverno is we're expanding it to beyond Kubernetes, right? So also for any other platform engineering workflows, like applying policies to Terraform or infrastructure as code in general. Any such use cases or anything else on your roadmap where you would like to try Kyverno?
So we're using Terraform. I think we could use it there, but I'm not the Terraform master, so I'm not sure in which case we would introduce it together with it. I'm only using it really on Kubernetes, but I think it makes sense to have it on the whole infrastructure, not only on the cluster.
Right. Yeah. A lot of times what we've seen is, because of that regulatory compliance type of reasons, people want that holistic view of compliance, right, across cloud as well as Kubernetes, which is where, like you mentioned, using it in both would start making sense. So that was one of our drivers as well.
To have then an overview of our own policy, I think might be helpful if you're maybe Terraform code with the Terraform policies, with the cluster policies. That was only one single point of dashboard maybe, so that the user or we as platform team don't have to search on different places.
Right. Yeah, and that's what, one of the other tools we have at Nirmata, we call Control Hub, right? And Control Hub provides that single unified view across pipelines, clusters, as well as other infrastructure. And it's built on the same reporting that Kyverno has, which we have spun out into a separate project now called Open Reports. So any other scanner or policy engine can also use that. In fact, Kubernetes uses that. It's integrated into SUSE and I think some of their products as well. And then other policy engines are also starting to look at it. Also, Trivi and Falco have adapters that can produce reports in that format. So the idea is for platform teams to get integrated reporting, much like we can do that with OpenTelemetry for metrics and observability, have one standard for reporting across different scanners and tools.
That makes sense. I think I have to read a lot of stuff after the talk here.
That's good. It's always good. Everybody learning different things. We're coming up on time. So a couple of closing questions. You are an expert at giving talks about getting started with Kyverno. If someone's just beginning their policy as code journey with Kyverno, what is one piece of advice you would give them?
Take an easy policy. They're good to understand just by reading it, deploy it to the local K3S cluster, and deploy some resources to see the feedback. That's how I started, and I liked it.
Very good. Also, because you are giving talks, do you have any upcoming talks or projects, courses, areas of work you'd like listeners to know about so that they can also get involved in the different things that you do?
Actually, I don't have feedback for talks for the next year. I have some ideas I gave and they were evaluated yet, so I think the feedbacks will come in January, but I plan to visit again the Container Days in Hamburg and the Cloudland in the Heide Park next year.
Have you been to those conferences before?
Yes, I have been there this year and the last year.
And how are they? I've heard they are packed, that they have really big attendance.
I think they're different. The conference in Hamburg is quite huge. There are a lot of talks, a lot of people, and the listeners at the talks, the amount is pretty high. I think about 200 or 300. It's not unusual. And in the Cloudland, there are also a lot of people, but the sessions are a bit smaller. So there are people between, I think, 20 to 50 persons, and it's taking place in an amusement park. So if you're done with the talks, you can go to the roller coaster and enjoy the time.
You can actually go ride with them. sounds. That's a cool venue for a conference, actually. There you go, Jim.
Yeah,
Next
I think
time.
so too. And you always meet someone you know at the roller coasters.
It's a very cool venue. Where can listeners follow you, Marie, if they want to connect with you and get some consulting?
You can find me and my team on the homepage cubespectra.com. There is an explanation for the modular cloud stack I mentioned at the beginning, and also some blogs about the topics we like to write and talk about. And of course, there are the events where you can meet someone of us giving a talk or just meeting some at our stands.
Very cool. Jim, any closing thoughts?
Just one question. Will you be at KubeCon EU in March?
No, I won't be at the KubeCon, but I think you will be there, right?
Yes, we'll be there. Yeah.
We will be there. We have KyvernoCon going on. So this is clearly now in your path, your speaker path. You must submit for KyvernoCon event. If it's not an in-person event at KubeCon EU or NA, you can always submit for a virtual event, which will probably be happening, I think, end of May, early June this year in 2026. So
Okay.
I will make sure you get the CFP because you're already you're completely ready to be giving talks at KyvernoCon. You should be keynoting it.
That's good to know.
There you go. There you go. We've got an event just for you, Marie.
Yeah, right.
Any closing thoughts you'd like to leave us with, Marie?
Thanks a lot. It was quite interesting to talk to you, to get new stuff I could read about. I always like to learn new stuff about Kyverno, about Kubernetes. So thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. As our very first speaker, you've been a lovely speaker and a very good sport, considering it's our first time out. You've got tons of experience. You gave a lot of really great use cases that people can pull from. Lots of real world perspective, which isn't always easy to get just out in the wild. So great to have you here. It's been an absolute pleasure. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining our very first episode of PolicyBytes. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we will have a lot more conversations coming up. So be sure to subscribe, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, anywhere you get your podcasts, YouTube as well. You'll be able to enjoy PolicyBytes. Hang out with our Kyverno and Nirmata team across socials on LinkedIn, X, the platform previously known as Twitter, and all over Slack. Any Slack channel you can imagine, someone on our team is probably there, whether it's Kubernetes Slack, CNCF Slack, or just about any other Slack channel in the cloud native space. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. We'll be back soon with another episode of PolicyBytes.